Burton and I'm an aeromodeller and an engineer. Join me on a fascinating journey where I show you some of the techniques used in scale aeromodelling. So just a quick video to show you how the Oleos are coming along. This is the cable clamps that are mounted in the wing on the heavy bit of ply that is notched into the ribs to locate it. And these cable clamps are holding this thin-walled steel tube in position and it locks it. And then this is the oleo outer that I've made. Now this is probably going to be a test piece. Now the reason I say that is because I started with tube, and when I thinned this end down, you can see the tube is now quite thin, which means there's a bit of a weak point right at the point where it gets thin and goes to thick. Now your comments would be welcome here. Do you think that is going to be strong enough, or do you think that's going to just snap? Now I've got some solid bar coming which I can replace this with, and then that end section there will be solid metal, which will be better for a lot of reasons, and I may just do that. But this is T6, aluminium T6, so it's quite strong stuff. And then what happens is it just simply slots into there like that, and then there's a screw that comes in from the root rib, or not a screw, but there's a hole that goes right the way through here and hits the tube between the clamps, and then there is a bolt that then goes through the leg, the steel tube, and through into this rib here, and then there's an anchor nut on the other side. So if you use a long Allen driver, it'll go right through here, contact the bolt head, which will be spring loaded so it pops out, and then you tighten it in and it'll go through the leg into the grub screw or into the blind nut at the other side, and that means that you could lock the leg in position. And you remove it once unlocked, slide it back in, put your driver right down through here, locks it, and that's it. It won't come out. And then there's no visible holes. The way Dave Woomsley did it, he made a hole in the leading edge and the driver went straight through into it there, and the blind nut was on the back of there, which would work too, but it does mean you end up with a hole. I think this way, if I come through from the end, the hole will be in the root rib, which nobody will see. So there is one more bit to it. At the top you have to drill a hole right the way through this, through the steel, to a blind nut at the back end of this. And what you do to this end here then is you then file a notch, and what happens is the bolt stays inside here in the tube and it acts as a key right near the top, and then you put the slot in this, so when you put that down you have to rotate it until it drops into the bolt slot, and that's what keeps the legs straight. So the bolt that comes in from the side just locks it up and down, and the bolt that goes in front to back simply stops it turning. Hope that makes sense. I've also made the inner section, or most of it, and the grub screws in the end. There'll be a hole just here for the axle. I'm waiting for the axle bolts to arrive. They're going to be M5 high tensile steel bolts. Will form the axle, and then that M4 grub screw at the end will lock the axle in place. This then slides down inside this, and the springs sit inside it. It sits about that long. But I made this area here of a smaller diameter to take a clamp, but it wasn't till I'd finished doing that I realized that I've taken too much metal off there, because I'm going to end up boring this out to this size, or that end of this size, and that actually will leave no metal to clamp to. So bit of a faux pas. So I might just wait for the solid aluminium to arrive. Of course, everything you do that involves a lathe involves money. It just seems to be the way of the world. So I come out and use my lathe, and I have to bring my checkbook with me. It's just always the way of the world, it seems. So here's my problem. If I put my my outer undercarriage tube in there, I simply need to put my 15mm reamer in here. Spot the problem. My chuck won't take 15mm reamer. Also, I can't get the reamer into the chuck at this end. It won't go in deep enough. Oh, it will. Oh, it will. It will. It might do. I might just try this. What I was thinking of doing is actually machining the reamer shaft to be smaller diameter, but it's very hard steel, and I'm not sure whether I can cut it. I might give it a go though. You never know. But of course, what I have had to do is get my checkbook out. So I bought another chuck for the end of my Myford. Fortunately, they're only about 30 quid, so it's not too bad. And I needed one that goes up to 20mm anyway. This only goes up to about 10. And I'm starting to do bigger and bigger projects, so I think I'm going to just replace this. This is a 2MT for a Myford ML7 tapered. There we go. So it's a MT2 tapered thread on the end of that. So as I say, I've ordered another one with a chuck that will go up to 20mm. One other little thing that was quite interesting. I've moved to, I don't know whether you saw in some of the comments, whether you've been following bits and pieces. I normally use a 3-jaw chuck, and this is a Bernard 3-jaw chuck. But what's happened is it's worn such that it now won't, I can't put parts in it and they be straight. I end up with wobble, and I can't get rid of it. And it's just the thread that operates the jaws has worn so much that now it won't hold things straight. So I've gone to my 4-jaw chuck, which is quite a lot of faffing around to set it up, because when you put each piece in, you then have to use a gauge such as this. You have to use a gauge such as this and position it so that it touches the work, and then you have to adjust each of the 4 jaws in turn until you get the run out to be as small as possible. I'm getting it down to around 5,000 run out, so that's proving really good. And what it's meant is that, well, let's show you what happens if you don't get this run out right. When you turn the material from one end to the other to do either end of it, you'll get what I've got here. When I made this, I used the 3-jaw chuck, and you can see that what happens is when you turn half of it, turn it round, put it in the chuck the other way, and turn the other half, there's a step where the two aren't perfectly aligned. Now that's not a problem as long as, and it isn't a problem in this, because if you look at the drawing, the section that is true, this section, has all been turned while clamped at this end. So the bit that slides inside the piston is that bit, well, it actually slides to there. So that's all the movement. So you can see all the movement is, that ridge is not going to impact the piston's movement. So you can see that there's a step there. But using the 4-jaw chuck has meant, and getting the run out as close as possible, you can see that section there, that whole midsection has been turned in 2 sections, up to there and up to there, and you can see a very slight line, and it's not a step, which is what you'd think. It's not a step at all. All it is just a machining line where the texture of the metal changes very slightly. because it's cutting in a different direction. So I'm really pleased the 4-jaw chuck is actually working really well. I'm not sure what all the mottling effect is on the on here, but I think it's just where I've been sliding it in and out of the leg of the mount. So this is how Dave Woomsley mounted the undercarriage on his quarter scale Chipmunk. Jerry Bates puts a plate. I didn't really like that idea, so I'm going with this one because it makes it very much easier to remove. So there you go, quick update on that. I'm just waiting for metals to arrive, tools, bits and pieces to arrive. The reamer arrived this morning, but unfortunately it won't fit in the chuck. The chuck won't arrive till midweek, so I think I'm kind of stuck now, waiting for bits and pieces. As you can see, every time I get the lathe out and try to do anything, it costs me material. I bought all this tubing to try and make these, and still ending up with the wrong sizes. So, oh dear, I'm just not very good at this, am I? Metal, I'll stick to balsa. I'm really pleased with the way this is fitting in there, and there's no play whatsoever. It's just slides in and out. But as I say, I'm just very concerned, and your feedback is welcome, as to whether that is just too thin. It's about 1 millimeter on each edge, so T6 could be strong enough, who knows. In a way, I want it to break anyway. I'd rather make another leg than a heavy landing tearing the wing apart. It's easier just to take the leg out, machine another one. So feedback please. What do you think? Go with these or wait for the solid tube? This is obviously much lighter. I suddenly thought, why don't I just reduce the size of the inner section from the 15 millimeters that I planned down to 12 millimeters? Then it would fit inside the tubing without any reaming. So that's what I did. 12 millimeters is not scale, 15 millimeters is scale, but 12 millimeters actually gives me plenty of clearance for the springs. So I'm going to go with 12 and we'll see what happens. Well, okay, let's just add a little bit more to that before we say cheerio for now. There's still a little bit more to do, but not much, not much. As you know, I'm still concerned about the diameter of that tube, as to whether it's going to be strong enough. But I thought I'll plough on anyway, because it's all good experience, and what I learned from this I can then apply to one that I make with a solid shaft. The problem being, with a solid shaft, I've got to bore that hole down the middle if I use solid metal, whereas this way I've used the actual bore that the manufacturer supplied with the tube, and this was a 12 mil. So what I did was I turned the inner bit down to 12 mil. You can see I've put a 2 mil slot in it, about 3 mil deep, and I've made, I don't know whether you can see it, what's called a dog grub screw. And what it is, it's a grub screw with a rounded end on it, which will run in the channel. So the idea is that the screw goes through the outside, sits in that channel, and then the leg runs up and down that. Okay. What you'd normally do with these is you'd have the slot in the outside section, and then your screw would go right through a hole through the slot into a hole. What that does, though, it means that the slot where it's open is open to the elements, and you can get grease, and well, if you've got grease in there, then dirt and crap will stick to it. So I'm just going to run through the assembly of the thing first. What I've got is these 12 mil slugs which I've made, and they're a nice snug fit. Not snug, but they will slide in, but it's a good fit. I've got 2 of these. One is positioned right between the two joints, between the two sections, and it sits in there like that. And then that little grub screw holds it in place. It's going to impart a little bit of strength to that between those two parts, which is where I'm really worried that it could snap, but I don't think it's going to impart much. But the reason for it is to stop the spring going up through the tube. So when we load it with a spring, and this is a pretty good spring, pretty strong spring, but I have I bought one of these. It's a set of, I don't know, 200 screws or 200 springs, and there's lots of different sizes in there and lots of different strengths. These are really tough, so if I really need something a bit stronger, they'll go in. But these are nice, and yeah, that's more of those. And if I want it to be a bit softer, these will go in. I may even go for something like this, but cut it in half and then use for the other half, use something softer so that the initial spring is soft, but then after that it's quite tough, because I do want these to sit down with the oleos almost fully compressed on the ground, but obviously not fully compressed because I do need some load. So we'll load it with this spring for now. And the oleo inner goes in, and normally we'd put some of this Neogel grease on there, and that goes in there. I'm gonna have to compress it a little bit, probably off camera, and that goes to there. Then the dog grub goes in there. Not so far that it binds. And there we go. So some good strong travel there. Very little movement, no torsional movement at all, or very, very little, but nice and strong. And then I've got my 35 millimeters of travel that I want. So all that remains is to put somehow to affix that in the end there. I won't push it all the way in because I won't be able to get it out again. What I'm thinking of using, and again comments will be welcome, is some JB weld around that, and then put it in. And then what I have to do is I have to drill a hole. I'm going to take that out for now so you can get an idea. So I'm going to drill a hole just below the surface so that the hole just touches the top. So if you imagine there's a hole in the end of that, the very end of that, and then what I do with that in place as well, and then what I do is I saw along the edges of the holes, and what I'm aiming to do is create a channel. And when there's a nut and bolt in the wing section going through the tube, if you imagine this is the tube in the wing, the steel tube. So what I do is I drill right through these, and then the bolt goes through the hole and out the other side and is locked, and that hole remains with the bolt pinned through. Then on this section where that hole has gone through, I open it up so that it becomes a slot. That way when you push that through there, if you imagine that's the bolt and there's a slot in that, you push that in there and it has to rotate until it lines up, and then the last bit it's lined up, and that locks it in position so that it can't twist, so that the leg can't twist in this tube. Okay, so the tube is rigid to the aircraft and bolted, and then as the leg slides up it goes into the notch and stops this happening. Okay, that's it. I think that is a wrap. So what I'll do is I'll try some JB weld in the end of that, and then all I've got to do is try and drill and make this channel in those two sections. I think you'll agree that's come out really well.